Hello everyone and welcome to the RV Inspection and Care channel. I'm Dwayne and I'm a certified RV inspector. And today we're going to be talking about how I rebuilt my RV water heater. You know, as RVs age, well, the components and the appliances inside the RV are aging too. Sometimes you can repair them, sometimes you just have to replace them. And it is true that with some appliances, when they reach the end of their life cycle, you just replace them altogether. But the good news is that with water heaters, they can often be repaired and even rebuilt. And then they'll function almost like new and last you a lot longer. Now, in my rig, I have a 2004 motorhome, so my water heater has been functioning for 16 years. So yes, it's about time that it needed some attention. Sure enough, I noticed that the heating element had stopped working, so I had no more electric heating in the water heater. And on the propane side, or the LP side, it was degrading. You know, it was not working as well as it really should. And I figured that it was the burner tube assembly that looked kind of old and ratty and needed to be replaced. So while I was doing that, I just figured, hey, let's just rebuild this water heater. So I went ahead and replaced the heating element. I replaced the burner tube. While I was there, I went ahead and replaced the thermostats. There's two thermostats in these water heaters, one for the 120 volt and one for the 12 volt side. And then the cover over the thermostats was ripped. Somehow it got ripped over the years, so I replaced that as well. Now, I did not replace the anode rod in my heater at this time because I had actually just done that not long ago. However, if you're doing a big rebuild on a water heater, that would be a perfect time to go ahead and replace the anode rod in these Suburban water heaters at the same time. Now, even though it's not part of this video that's coming up, it will be a part of a video that I'm going to give you the link to it down in the description. And all you have to do is go to that video and watch it, and it'll tell you how to change out the anode rod. And you could go ahead and do that at the same time that you do everything else that I'm showing you here in this video if you want. Now, before I got started with the whole project, safety comes first. So for me, I want to be very careful that nothing happens that is surprising, that is unpleasant while I'm working on that RV water heater. So I went ahead and shut off all the electric to the coach. I shut off all the water, and that way I could work on the water heater without fear of having a safety problem or issue. Well, now having all that said, let's go ahead and take a look at how I rebuilt the water heater. Okay, so as we get started, the first thing I'm going to remove is the burner tube assembly. You can see how rusted it is. And on the right-hand side, there's a nut underneath that needs to be loosened and removed. And then once you do that, there's another nut on the left-hand side that you loosen up with your wrench. And then once you have it loosened, usually you can just hand loosen it from there. And it's a pretty simple process. Now, once both of those are totally loose, then you can take the entire burner assembly out. Now, before I go further, I'm going to release the pressure in the water heater by the valve at the top and let that water drain out until it's obvious that there's no more really pouring out. And that way you can get to the heating element and get it removed easily without that pressure in the tank. Next thing to do is to remove the screws that hold the heating element cover in place. And so there's the first one that's really easy, that comes out nice and easy. But the next one's a little bit of a bear, you got to really kind of get in there. But you can get that. And then finally the third one is underneath. Once again, that's pretty easy to do. Once you have those removed, then you can pry off the cover very easily, and that exposes the head of the heating element. So the next thing to do is start removing the wires that feed the electric to the heating element. And very simple to do with a Phillips head screwdriver. I removed the screws altogether. You don't have to do that, but I just went ahead and did that and got them out of the way. Now, once you have the wires loosened completely, then make sure that you get them out of the way, because you're going to have to access that head of the heating element to get it out of there. So you need those wires out of the way. Then I used a socket here with a breaker bar to get it all started and loosen it up. And then once it's nice and loose and turning fairly freely, then I took the breaker bar off and just finished it up with the socket itself. And as it loosens up, you'll see water is going to start coming out, just pouring out of the tank. That's fine. Go ahead, just let it pour right on out. And once it's completely done, then you can remove the heating element itself. Now, the next step, obviously, is to go ahead and replace the heating element with the new one. And to do that, you've got to kind of finagle it a little bit sometimes to get it seated right and turning in those threads like it should. But once you do, you'll notice that it just starts turning in place pretty simply and pretty easily. From there, I took my socket and hand tightened it really snug in there. You could use your breaker bar to make sure it's really snug, but just don't over tighten it. Be careful of that. After you've done that, the next step is to go ahead and put the wires back in place. And so you put them under the screws that are available there for each wire and tighten them right on down. After that's done, the only thing that's left for the heating element is to put the cover back in place. And again, there's 3 screws that just have to be put back just like you took them off. Now, the next thing we're going to do is replace the thermostats on this water heater. And to do that, there's 2 screws that holds that cover in place. And they're pretty easy to access, so it shouldn't be very hard to get those off. Once they're out of the way, then just start prying off the cover, and it comes out fairly easily right in your hand. And there you go, there's the 2 thermostats. Now, on the top of each one, there's a spacer. Take those off. They're just taken off by hand, very easy to remove. And then the next step is start loosening the nut in the center of each thermostat. There's just one, so just loosen it and then remove the nut, and that allows you to remove the thermostat. There are 2 wires that are connected on each thermostat. So undo them. When you had the new thermostat in hand, then put those wires back in place and then replace the thermostat back on the post. And then once you hand tighten that nut back on the post, then go ahead, take your socket and make sure that it's nice and snug and tight and in place. Now, both thermostats operate the same way, so removal and replacement is the same for both. And then you put the spacers back on the top of each thermostat. And again, they're hand done. After that, it's just a matter of putting the cover back in place. And again, remember, you have 2 screws that hold the cover in place. So just go ahead and replace them. And then you have your thermostats all done. Now, the next thing we're going to do here is replace the burner tube. And as you can see, I've done that. It's a brand new burner tube, nice and shiny. And so now I'm hand tightening the nut on the left-hand side. Then I'll go and do the same one on the right-hand side. Then take my wrench and tighten both of those down nice and snug. You want them to be good and tight on both sides to keep that burner tube in place. Now once we've done that, the next step is to turn on the water, and when the water starts pouring out the relief valve at the top, then you close it. Well, there you go. That's how I rebuilt my RV water heater. Now, if you're not comfortable with what you saw in the video, doing it yourself, that's okay. Really, you could just hire a good, competent RV service tech and they could do it for you. And it probably wouldn't cost you a lot more because, honestly, it doesn't take a long time to do everything that you saw in the video, especially since they're pretty used to doing that anyway. But I have to say this, I think that most RVers actually could do what I showed you in the video, especially if you're familiar with the tools that I use there. Then yes, you probably could do it yourself. Now, where did I get the parts for this whole rebuild project? Well, that's something I really wanted to share with you. There's a great website online, and it's for a company called PDX RV Wholesale. And I'll put the link down below in the video here and in the description below the video on YouTube. And that way you can go find the site for yourself. Now, I recommend that you bookmark it because it's a very good resource for RVers. These guys have parts for almost every appliance you can think of in an RV. And so it's a great way for you to get your parts and to get them for really a good price too. In fact, all the parts that I got for my project, they were less than $100. And I consider that a real deal because for less than $100, I took a water heater that was barely functioning to one that functions like brand new. And that was well worth the investment. Now, another point I want to make here in this video is that there are two major brands of water heaters that are most often used in RVs. The one that I showed you in this video is a Suburban 10-gallon water heater. That's what's in my rig. However, the other company that's often used is Atwood water heaters. Now, the good news is that PDX RV Wholesale has rebuild kits for Atwood water heaters too. So those parts are readily available and they're pretty easy to install too. So it doesn't matter either way, you could do the project yourself in most cases. Now, I didn't have an Atwood water heater on my rig, so I couldn't demonstrate it for you, but just be assured that it's not all that difficult to do. Not much more difficult than the Suburban water heater. Another point I want to make is that in this video, to take out that heating element, I used a socket with a breaker bar, to get it started and get it turning and get it out of there. Now, I did that because some of these water heater elements, if they've been in there for a while, and I could tell that this one had, well, the threads sort of rust and corrode a little bit, and they can be hard to get out. So with a socket with a breaker bar, you can pretty much break that loose and get it out there fairly easily, fairly quickly. So that's why I used that. And by the way, if you're using a socket, make sure that the socket is a 6-point socket, not a 12-point. The 12-point will slide on the head of the heating element. It'll kind of slide around on it, but the 6-point grabs it and really applies the torque when you use that breaker bar. However, you don't have to use the socket and breaker bar. There are heating element wrenches that are available. In fact, Camco makes one. It's a 1.5 wrench for these heating elements. And also you can even find them very often at home improvement stores too. So you could use those. I just like to use the socket and breaker bar because I know it's going to come off easy and I'm not going to have a big problem with it. Well, I hope you enjoyed all of that information that I just shared with you about how I rebuilt my water heater, and maybe something I shared with you will help you in a project that you might have with your water heater as well. Well, that's it for now. Have safe and happy travels, my friends. Until next time.